Hi, everybody. My name is Stephanie Marie Garcia, and I'm the head of special collections and archives for the Miami-Dade Public Library System. One of the things that I do within my role is oversee many of the special collections at the library, including our Florida collection, genealogy collection, rare books and archives, and especially the Vasari Project. So today I'm going to be in conversation with Barbara Young, who is an art librarian, curator, and is a co-founder for the Vasari Project at the Miami-Dade Public Library. We'll be talking about the exhibition, Barbara Young, Journeys in Radical Librarianship, organized by Women Artists Archive Miami, otherwise known as WAAM. And that was on view at their space from July 2021 to January 2022. Hi, Barbara.
Good morning, Stephanie.
So Barbara, having a long career as a librarian, an art librarian, and a curator, what was it like for you in this experience, being the subject rather than the curator? And maybe what new insights might you have gained from the experience?
I guess I didn't really think of myself as subject so much. In going through all the old materials, it was a wonderful journey down memory lane. But there's so many people that we've worked with and over the years, so many artists that we've worked with and organizations and things, that it was just, I sort of felt that they were still the subject. I was just sort of collecting these things and that I had been involved with and had a wonderful time with. But going all the way back to, I started in 1976 at the library, working on the Artmobile and going back through all the Artmobile materials and then going back through different exhibitions that we did outside of the Artmobile. It was wonderful. There's so many people in this community that we were able to work with and that were so generous to the library.
I know that we wanted to talk about a lot of things, right? We wanted to talk about the exhibition, which I think was such a beautiful tribute to you and all of the work that you've done in Miami over the years. And when I was driving to work today, I was thinking about when I met you. And I know that we were going to talk about like all of the things that have kind of come up to this point for the Vasari Project. But I know I was thinking about that day that I met you, and it was the Dela Cruz collection, an exhibition, or no, it was a talk. It was a presentation that they were doing.
Right, it was a lecture.
And we met through Karen Reifus, and it was one of those things where I was telling Karen that I was catching up with her because she was an old professor, and telling her, oh, well, I'm going to school for library science. And she was sitting right next to you, and she was just like, and it was like I might have like met rock star, like super famous. I was like, what? And so I was still finishing library school, and I remember that I was doing this project talking about how important it was for Miami to be preserving their history and what kind of things are we doing now, kind of like arms on my hips, like we're not doing enough. And then finding out about the Vasari Project and then just being, simultaneously feeling dumb that I didn't know it existed. And then extremely excited that someone had already had this, brilliant idea that I had, but they had it, almost 20 years ago. So, I know that we wanted to talk about the permanent art collection and all of those things going back, but for posterity, I wanted to include that because the Vasari Project kind of brought us together in a way as well, which was just, amazing and fortunate and coincidental.
Yeah.
So would you like to talk a little bit about the permanent art collection or how kind of like the beginnings before?
Well, I think if we talk about the beginnings, we have to talk about Margarita Cano. She came from Cuba in 1961 and started working at the library in 1962, not in the art department. I think originally she was in circulation, and then over the years she was in business and science and some different areas like that. But she had a very good broad knowledge, and she was also a practicing artist. I mean, she's always been making art since I've known her. But when she ended up in the art department, she started the idea of circulating art, and they had reproductions and things like that. And then people started giving the library, some of the artists in the community were giving the library original works. Some of the collectors were giving the library original works. And at that time, we began to realize that those were not things that really should be circulating. We had developed a relationship with people in the county where the county departments could borrow, I think, 6 artworks and keep them and stuff. And that was fine with the reproductions, but there were some things that just were a little bit too precious to be circulating. And we stopped the circulating program because some of the people borrowing the things loved them too much.
And just never wanted to give them back.
That's sort of the curse of librarians. Sometimes people love books too much. I rode on the train once with a woman that was telling me how much she loved a book, and I realized that she'd had the book out for about 2 years. She just thought nobody else would want to be reading this precious book, and so she was taking care of it. But that was what happened with the permanent collection and the circulating pieces. People would just, and with the county departments having the things, it was very hard to go into a director of a county department and say, I want this off your wall now.
Come on, wrap it up. Yeah, it wouldn't be great.
That was something that we stopped doing, the circulating. But in the meantime, the permanent collection had developed out of that original concept of checking things out to people.
And the collection now is over 6,000 works. So
I would hesitate to count it, but
yeah.
Also when Margarita started, there was no art on the walls, and the permanent collection was like a reference collection. It was really a community reference collection, and it was up on the walls where people could see it. And I think a lot of libraries collect prints and things like that, but I don't know if many of them, or how many of them are as outgoing as the Miami-Dade public library system is with their collection. It's because any library that you go into, you're going to see and beautiful works from people in the community, or a lot of works by African American artists, a lot of work by Latinx,
Mm-hmm.
Latinx.
Go Barbara. Yes.
I'm sorry, I'm trying.
Love it. No, love it.
So, but anyway, we tried to fill in the reference collection, the book collection with the artwork, and saw that really the art collection as a visual reference collection. So it's information, it's visual information that we tried to make very public and very available.
I've over the last it's been over 3 years now that I've been been in custody, or been the caretaker for the Vasari Project alongside a lot of the other collections. But in those 3 years, an archive is so full of so much content, and we have over 200 collections. Our art services department, which you oversaw for many years, has profound amount of material within the Vasari Project, like well over probably something between 15 to 20 boxes just of content, of correspondence and all of that. All of this to say that I learn something new about you probably every other week, or I'll find some new piece of information. Things that you're okay with people knowing, but even the idea of the permanent art collection and how it existed, I found recently some research material that I think might have been done in the early stages of this, just seeing what other libraries were doing this. And while I'm not certain how many institutions are currently have as large of a collection as we do, I know at the time this was extremely rare and it wasn't very common. And you and Margarita in some recorded material were able to really boast how special this collection is, and how important the work that you were doing at the time, and how the Vasari Project ends up now playing a role in that, because it's maintaining that information and kind of holding it in a high regard, and saying that, not only is art important, but the history of art is important. And I'm going to drop a big word, provenance, like where these things come from, and how that kind of also identifies our histories, especially in Miami, at least for us.
Well, we were very lucky because people were very generous. I think for me, the Artmobile was an introduction to so many different people in the community, artists and collectors, and Southeast Bank had been involved with the Artmobile, and they're gone now, but they had a wonderful art collection. And they also gave us funding and support. I think we have some Jake Lawrence pieces that came from Southeast Bank. The Bacardi Corporation, there was a gentleman now who actually is working at the library, Juan Espinosa, who was the director of the art program at the Bacardi. And we have an incredible collection at the library of Carl Van Vechten photogravures that came through the Bacardi.
Is that the photographs from the Harlem Renaissance, right? Those photographs are gorgeous.
Write my name. They're photogravures and stuff that were done. I think it's an edition of 100. Mm-hmm. So mostly those pieces, I think they were only made available to libraries and museums. So they're very special.
They're beautiful. And the idea that we have Jacob Lawrence prints in the system as well. I saw one recently at Varick Park. And just, it's awesome. It's amazing.
Jake and Elizabeth Catlett and I think Mildred Howard, Richard Hunt. We have a lot of works by and then in this area, of course, Jean Tenney and Charles Humes and Gary Moore and Kabuya Pamela Bowens. And so
so you mentioned the Artmobile a couple times, and I sometimes forget. Well, at this moment, I've actually remembered that we are recording a conversation and that we should mention a little more about the Artmobile, because some folks might not know what it was. And yeah, so if you didn't mind just kind of expanding on that.
Sure. I was hired in 1976 in August, I guess I started, but the Artmobile had been was in existence. They just we hadn't started service. The library hadn't started service. So I initiated the service with the Artmobile, but it was a project Margarita Cano had been doing research and had read about Artmobiles and art projects, museums that were going out into the community. And a woman named Betty Corcoran, now Betty Corcoran Fleming, had a gallery, and her husband, Joe Fleming, was the attorney for the Christos, Jean-Claude and Christo, but that's another story. But anyway, she was involved with the group, and they were looking for some kind of a special project, and she got Southeast Bank involved. And so the van was purchased, and Lowell Nesbitt was commissioned to do the exterior painting. And that was done, I guess, in the spring of 76 or something. And then I was hired later that summer and started art service of the Artmobile. But we went out to, we had about 6 exhibitions a year in the Artmobile, always original artworks, and very early on made connections with the schools. So we were going to community colleges, we were going to FIU, we were going to the University of Miami and the Dade County Public Schools. And that was a wonderful connection. I mean, I think it was as much about art as it was just a good feel-good for the library and for the county to have this van go out. And we always carried books, so it was always very book related. But we got to know people like Lily Garcia, who's a wonderful friend of the library, and Stacy Mancuso, and there's a woman named Karen Greer that I'm very close to. Just dozens and dozens I could go on with because we went to schools all over the county. And that was one year we had, I think, 60,000 people go through the Artmobile. And those are at that time pretty impressive numbers. We went to the youth fair. That was a big draw. Jean-Claude and Christo, we had exhibitions with them. We had an exhibition with Robert Rauschenberg, lots of shows with artists from the community. I went to Russia one year and met a gentleman in Kyrgyzstan at that time. And we had an exhibition of his paintings in the Artmobile, works on paper. So it was a little bit of everything, but lots and lots of support from the artists in the community.
It's amazing the people that you were able to engage with. And I mean, even beyond, because you end up being a huge help for the public artwork that we have here at the cultural, at the main library with Ed Rouchet. But to go back to the Artmobile, what's been so interesting is the more that I talk about the Artmobile, the more folks I meet that say, "Oh, I went to the Artmobile. I
I
remember."
know, that's so funny to me. I
You have a lot of people reach out to you and tell you?
Well, it just sort of surprises me. I don't know. It's a lovely surprise. It's a wonderful surprise. But that was one of the wonderful things about Anita's exhibition. I was there, and some people came up, and they had been in the Artmobile when they were, yay high and stuff. It was really, really special. And that was what we hoped, that it would be a lasting. We always talked about the art. In a way that we hoped we would ask the people questions. We would ask the kids questions so that they were actually dialoguing and providing a lot of the answers. And like I said, we always had books on the Artmobile. So if there was a question.
And even your invitations, like the brochures that the Artmobile and that Art Services was producing with you are amazing. I mean, I still look at them and we still will refer back to them. Not so much as a cheat sheet, but it does lend itself to like a really great layout where you'll talk about the exhibition, you'll give a list of all of the works that are there, but then you'll also give them like a suggested reading list that applies to what it is that you're looking at.
Yeah, I think that's so important. I recently curated an exhibition for the Museum of Arts and Sciences in Daytona Beach of artist books. And I was working with L&S Gallery here in Miami, and they did a beautiful, beautiful journal. And that was one of the things. I mean, it's a journal with all the artists represented, with a little statement about their work, and then also a list of suggested readings, which it just, I'm a librarian, Stephanie.
You're a librarian through and through, and it's the best. And it doesn't define you, but it's definitely one of the most amazing. Yeah. I think, and especially about you, because you're always giving. You're constantly providing information.
Well,
and I also
reference librarian. Sometimes I think reference librarians are the people that bring you so many books that you finally say, no, back.
Yes.
Too much. But I've got one more book. Have you seen this? Have you seen?
I love this. Yeah. That's usually it's kind of the say when. say when you don't want me to come back, because I will keep thinking about you and bringing you things. But I think that's also what people love about librarians, that in general, a librarian is there to help provide information, to help answer questions. If we know the answer, if not, we'll work with you to try and find them.
We're curious, and we want everybody to be curious, I think.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, absolutely. And even in art librarianship, I mean, when I went to art school and then took some time before I realized I wanted to become a librarian. But one of my experiences was working at the Rebel Collection, helping them with their research library. And
beautiful library. Oof, wonderful library.
Huge library, yeah. It's over 30,000. I mean, that was 30,000 volumes 10, 12, 15 years ago. So who's to say? But I remember not really realizing that an art librarian, I mean, can assist a number of different folks. But if we're just thinking about an artist, for example, maybe they're looking for something, maybe they're doing work in a certain style, and that art librarian can go, oh, that reminds me of this person, and this person. Why don't I bring them to you and you can look at it? Or can kind of think outside of the box too with someone, right?
Even with materials. I mean, one of my favorite things at the library was the Thomas Registry, which was like the yellow pages for the world. And people would be wondering about plastic or some metal process or something like that. And there was always a location, maybe not in Dade County, maybe not in Florida, maybe in California or in England or something like that. But you could locate them through this. I don't know what happened to that. I guess it's probably online like everything else now, isn't it? Thomas Registry.
I don't know, but I'm going to write it down because I could totally go. I'm like, already start typing.
I think Anne Hamilton said one time that was one of her favorite books. And when I used to have people come from New World School and do a library tour and stuff, I would pull that one off the shelf for them. Of course, that was a few years ago.
I remember going to one. I definitely went to one when I was in. I do, because when I did properly meet you, I guess it was about six or 7 years ago. You had this familiar look, and I just couldn't place it. And then, when we talked about it, I was like, oh, I must have met you at the library.
Well, I gave some of the tours, but there was also a wonderful librarian, Dorothy Donio, that did tours. So
The idea of the all of the references and resources made me start thinking about the artist files and I guess like just visual resource guides in general, which aren't really as common anymore because we have the internet. But when I went to School of Visual Art Library as part of a tour when I was in school, they showed us just, and at my library at school as well, there was just tons of vertical files that had visual resources. So if you were looking for something, and this is pre-internet, obviously, you could have like visual resources to whatever it is you were interested in looking at. And that kind of in my head goes to the artist files that the fine arts department had at the library for many years. And I'm like, and the birth of that was sort of like a mix of if we had like a Chagall print, which we do within the permanent art collection, we might have a folder on Marc Chagall, but then we would also have folders of contemporary artists that were working with the library as well, like Fernando Garcia.
There was a file that was images. I mean, again, this was pre-internet and stuff. And so people that would want a picture of a town in France or a rhinoceros or something like that, there was this kind of picture file that we had. But then also the art librarians were great at clipping and stuff. And so if there was a review or an invitation or a brochure or something, especially from artists in the community, they would be clipping that and collecting it. And those artist files were a real treasure. That was really, I mean, there were several kind of seeds, I guess, to the Vasari Project, but definitely that was a real important source and was absorbed by the Vasari Project, which was as it should be, perfect.
Would you like to talk a little bit about kind of the birth of the Vasari Project and how that came about?
Should we talk a little bit about some of the other things that the library did, maybe?
Yeah, absolutely.
I sort of made some notes that I was gonna.
Am I veering you off track? Because that's I'm very good at that. So
you're good. You're good.
For the record.
The Romer collection, that was very important, which now you're overseeing that as part of the Florida collection, these photographs of early Miami.
Which was what, 16,000 photographs, about 16 to 17,000 photographs of Miami from 1920 to 1950s.
Yeah, and Gleason Romer was a photographer who really was obsessed with creating this visual history of Miami. And when the library was still under the city of Miami, he approached Merritt Steerheim, who at that time I think was the assistant city manager or something like that. But he had a vision too of history and understood history and appreciated it. And he was able to purchase Romer's photographs, and they became part of the library collection. So, and they cover, I guess, the 30s and the 40s and things like that. So architecture and parks and things like that, you can find a lot of information there. The timeline and the Miami the Miami Tumble was something that was really a community project, and it was initiated to make people aware of the new library opening up and the library moving from Bayfront Park to the cultural center where it would be with a museum, an art museum and a history museum, or an art collection, a Kunsthal. I guess it was more of a museum without a collection. It was an exhibition space.
Bayfront Park was where the former library used to be. And then all of this was kind of, they were making this big plan. It was like decade of progress. They'd just gotten a pile of money to start opening new branches and also to make a cultural plaza.
Well, the decade of progress, definitely we should mention, because that was a big deal for all the county. But the library, I think, ended up with 12 new libraries from that money. That was passed 1972. And I know South Miami branch, the regionals, South Dade Regional, North Dade Regional, Northeast or Aventura Library, all those were built on, Model Cities Library were built under that. And Art in Public Places started. The 70s were pretty amazing in Miami.
They were.
Art in Public Places started, then Bob Sindler was the first director of that. And the first time I became aware of that was at the Model Cities Library, their opening. And they had a collection of wonderful African textiles that were installed in the library. And then they had Sam Gilliam's work and Alma Thomas's work in the complex. And that was some of the first pieces, I guess, that were collected or were commissioned or acquired by Art in Public Places.
You mentioned the Miami Tumble. That was these boxes that were, what was it? They weren't refrigerator boxes. What were they?
We got
like large industrial boxes that look like domino pieces.
Yeah,
right?
There were big cardboard pieces. And Margarita and I had been talking, and we had seen the man on television that sets up the dominoes, and then you push one and they do these wonderful arrangements and stuff like that. And we were thinking, oh, that would be so much fun. We could do it all the way down Flagler Street. And that seemed, from Biscayne Boulevard all the way to where the new library was, that seemed like maybe there were opportunities for other things to happen. Then it was going to be books. It was going to be books. It went from dominoes to books. And then we got in touch with a guy that had a business where he had these huge cardboard boxes. He may have been a friend of the library. He was a very nice man, but I think they were about, I don't know, 6 or 7, 8 feet tall, something like that.
Big.
They were big, but we sent them out to artists in the community. We sent them to schools. We actually sent some up to Hunter College. I had a friend that was teaching up there, and sent some up there. And Lowell Nesbitt, he did one. Andy Warhol's studio did one. And anyway, they were these big, wonderfully then painted boxes by artists and students. And they were arranged from the old library all the way down to where the new library would be opening. And that was on a Sunday. And South Campus did a really funny one that was a little car. They turned the box into a car. But anyway, they were arranged. And then that Sunday, somebody pushed them. I think it was maybe the mayor, Maurice Ferre or something. I'm not sure, but can't remember. But anyway, and it was really pretty wonderful.
That was a story that you told me. And at that point, when you had told me the story, I didn't have any visual reference. So I was just imagining what this sort of thing would look like. And then as we started going through processing boxes and reviewing items, I remember seeing them, and it was one of those like, oh, this was the Domino Project, this was the Tumble Project. And you see, we have some really great images that are now in our digital collections of it, and also found video of it. And you really do see what a big production this was, and how engaged the community was with it. And I think that's like one of many things that I believe that you and Margarita did when you were working at the library. You really invigorated so much. And I don't mean to be so tangential and go backward, but with the Artmobile, were those the first art exhibitions that were happening within the library, or had there been exhibitions happening like?
They did an exhibition of how a silkscreen print is made, and I think that was in '73 or something like that. So there had been not a lot of exhibitions, but definitely things were happening. There was another exhibition, I think, about Vasari or quilting or something, a visual exhibition. But going back to the dominoes, that was in 1981. And the Chicago Cows came after the Miami Dominoes. So thinking of these big participation things with artists doing all these different kinds of.
Oh, I definitely think you were trendsetters, because there's art. I mean, while our Artmobile no longer exists and stopped, right? Was it damaged from Hurricane Andrew?
It had a little bit of damage after Hurricane Andrew in 1992, but the libraries, South Dade Regional, Homestead, West Kendall, I mean, so many of the libraries had a lot of damage. And so there was a lot of shifting staff around, trying to supplement service to these communities that had lost their libraries. And they used the Artmobile as kind of a storymobile. And I think it lasted maybe 6 months, not even a year, probably. And then it was deaccessioned and was sold. And at one time, I knew who bought it, but I think I still have dreams about the automobile. Well, I haven't recently, but.
But Art Services ends up doing a Romer exhibition. I mean, you talk about the Romer the collection having been acquired, and that was like in the 60s, right? But
I could go back to the timeline that we did and tell you exactly when it was, but it was material that we already had when I started, so it was probably late 60s or something.
And it was purchased as a whole, but then you end up doing a proper exhibition with a book and everything that.
To open the library, we thought that the Romer collection would be a perfect way to showcase Miami and all the change in the history, the visual history and stuff like that. So that was the exhibition that we were going to do. And we were very fortunate. We got funding from Writer Corporation and the IVEX, Mr. Frost, Dr. Frost, and also the Brayman family donated money. So we were able to do the exhibition and also produce a book of Romer's work. And Gary Monroe was the curator for the project, and he wrote an essay for the book. And so it was we had hardback and softbacks. They were produced at a local printer at H&D Graphic, and they did a great job with it. And it traveled. We traveled that show to St. Louis, and I think there was another place, another public library that show was. Oh, it went to the International Center for Photography in New York at one time, that collection. So, but it's a wonderful collection, and I'm so glad that, the Florida collection and the Vasari collection are now definitely so close together. That was always the dream, that at least physically, the Florida collection and the Vasari would be in the library physically close together, but also having you overseeing both of those, it just makes so much sense.
Yeah, it is. It took in the beginning stages of learning about the Vasari Project. It was, I know that the physical archive has moved a few times. It was in a very small space, and then was moved to a larger area on the ground floor of the library, or the first floor, the main floor when you come in, and then now it's on the second floor, just sort of facing the Florida collection. And that's certainly, I think it does make a big deal. It is a big deal, because the Vasari Project is material that's documenting South Florida and the visual arts in South Florida. So the idea for it to be neighbors with the Florida collection is sort of,
it's a natural,
perfect sense. Yeah, it's a natural combination.
Yeah. Before I left, Dorothy Donio, who was head of what they call Fine Arts Department then, she was really wonderful with space and layouts and stuff. And she and I, and mostly Dorothy, had worked together to design a kind of area that the Vasari would be there, be close to the Fine Arts Department, and also be close to the Florida collection. So
should we talk about a Miami Thriving in Change?
Miami Thriving in Change was in 1990, and it was a very ambitious project of exhibitions. Gosh, I'm trying to think how many exhibitions. There was the one at Main Library that was work from collections.
There were many. I think you had about like eight or nine.
I was going to say 12, but
you might have had 12. It was quite a few, and it was over like maybe 2 years.
They sort of drug out, but we kind of opened everything, pretty much within a 6-month period, I guess. South Dade Regional had a show of photography, 50 years of photography. The Ceramic League had a show. The Watercolor Society had an exhibition. Women's Caucus for the Arts had an exhibition. We worked with the Black Arts Workshop, which became the Kumba Artists. They had an exhibition. And then the exhibition at the Main Library was a work from various collections, corporate and individual collectors in the community. And to go along with that exhibition, there was a little book that was in the Florida collection that I just loved. It was a kind of a timeline of Miami history. And I thought, wouldn't that be fun to have the labels kind of reflect that? So there'd be like a little bit of overview of what was going on in the community for different decades. And then there would be a list of, sort of highlights, sort of emphasizing the library and the library's art program, but other things were included too. And we started thinking about the labels and came up with the idea, well, let's do something that would be printed that could be a takeaway. And that was when we did the Miami timeline. There was a woman named Mary Mong, who's an artist, and very, very wonderful and very, very patient. And she did a lot of research on it. We worked with the people in the Florida collection. They added to it and stuff like that. But we went through newspapers and the old microfiche files and things like that to put that together. And so that's a really kind of a wonderful and a surprising look for a lot of people, because we still run into people and come to Miami and they sort of they brought all the history with them, or it started with Art Basel, but there were things happening here. The University of Miami, it was a low gallery for many years, but the community colleges, North Campus and South Campus, had really interesting programs and wonderful faculty. FIU, Bacardi, there was a lot of really wonderful things that were in the art world that were happening. The Miami Museum of Modern Art, which always people think, what is that? But Bernard Davis was this very, very interesting man that had the Miami Museum of Modern Art and was a lot of international connections. Anyway, there's a lot of surprises still, I think, for people with Miami history.
Definitely, and the influence that it's had nationally and internationally. We at the Vasari Project, so we'll eventually talk about the difference between an archivist and a librarian, but we get reference inquiries about Bernard Davis quite a bit, and it's always really interesting how influential he was, but also like a bit of an enigma in terms of trying to learn more about him. And so, so the Miami Thriving in Change and the beginnings of the art timeline happened in the 90s. And then what spawned sort of this obviously the continuation of the timeline, because now we have this guide that's telling us all of this material that exists, or that all of this history, and there's material attached to this history that we can amass and collectively put in one space. And how did that go about? I mean, I'm sure there was so much research just in doing the timeline.
Well, the timeline, produced a lot of information. And we following that, we did a lot of exhibitions at the library. And I guess Margarita retired sort of technically the end of 91, 92. And there'd been a lot of changes in the library at that time. And then we had Andrew, so we had to get through that. But all along there, we've had some really wonderful directors at the library. I should mention Ed Sense, the assistant director, Ben Guilford, who was just the most amazing man. And he kind of oversaw the physical production of the Artmobile and the preparation of the interior as a gallery with track lights and Velcro walls, so that we could Velcro the artwork and stick to the walls and travel with. And Raymond Santiago was a very supportive of the arts. And when Raymond came in, we did an exhibition in 2000, and he had suggested to do a big exhibition sort of featuring the permanent collection at the library. And I think that sort of triggered a lot of thinking about what the library had in terms of the permanent collection and how special it was. Michael Spring had come to that exhibition and was very encouraging. And I had taken a year to go down to South Dade Regional, and I was the manager down there for about a year. But I had left a lot of files at the main library where Art Services office was. And they were there and sort of worrying about them and thinking what would happen to them. And Helen was working with us then too. She had retired. Helen Cohen had retired from the Miami Herald, and she had used the library a lot for some research, for some writing projects, and we had worked together on some exhibitions, an an exhibition about the alphabet that I did that Helen got really involved with it. And we traveled around and collected things from various sources. But anyway, all these things were happening and people were talking about stuff, and the artist files were there, and the art services files were there, and the art services files were filled with letters from people like Elizabeth Catlett and Ed Ruscha, and different notes from people like Fernando Garcia, and information about Purvis Young. Purvis brought some of his papers to the library for us just to take care of them, because he had such a wonderful relationship with the library. I think he always felt safe, Anyway, there was all this stuff. And we started thinking, wouldn't it be great to have an archive of these materials to formalize that? And we were able to get funding from the Cultural Affairs, and that really triggered it. Helen was hired as the first. She wasn't technically an archivist, I guess. She was an art critic, but I guess she was functioning as an archivist.
She was. I think the term was they used the consultant was how she identified herself and how those that followed. But she was. I found she was a self-taught archivist. Yeah, for sure.
Oh, she was so enthusiastic, and she was such a cheerleader for the library and the Vasari Project and the artists in the community and all the cultural things. And she knew the art community well, but she also knew the writers, and she knew musicians, and classical music was something that she and her husband Raleigh were always going to symphonies and productions and stuff. So she had a really wonderful broad knowledge and passion. And I think, with the funding from Cultural Affairs and support of the library administration, and now you're so lucky because you have Ray Baker, another director that's giving a lot of attention and support. And Helen and I had dreams about, what would happen to this. I mean, she retired in 2010. I retired in 2005, and she retired in 2010. And we had Cesar Trasabarras worked with the collection for a while, but we always were trying to dream up you. So you were really, we created you. I know that you did some things before, but
I just manifested.
Huh?
I manifested at that at the Telecruz.
Yeah, like Venus, we fully formed from our imaginations and stuff. So we were so lucky with your being available and everything working out, and your director being so supportive, and the other people that you're working with. I think for what you're doing.
Thanks, Barbara. Yeah, I'm very grateful to Ray Baker. I'm very grateful to the library and just to how things have worked out. I mean, we talked how I went to art school, but then between going to library school, I worked with a lot of cultural institutions and kind of found my way into librarianship, and was always curious about archives, and early on didn't really know what the difference was. And now I realize that, to be a librarian is, the misconception that we're reading all the time. A librarian is there to assist. I felt like when I was going to library school, I was learning how to be a professional researcher. Like how do you manage and go through all of these resources, all of these sorts of things to help somebody answer one question or a series of questions. And then
places. I mean, you went to school in New York.
I went to I worked with a few galleries and a permanent art collection in Miami, and then I was able to do an internship with the Peggy Guggenheim collection in Italy, and it was sort of like at within that program, it was an internship that was 3 months, but you get to be in Venice. Oh my gosh. And I know that there were interns that were asking, oh, well, they wanted to work with the conservator. They wanted to work with the visitor services person or something. And I wanted to hang out with the librarian. Nobody else wanted to hang out with the librarian. And that was amazing. And just learning everything that they had to share with me. But then I shortly after that moved to New York and lived in New York for almost 10 years and was working and like tried to work in the arts and eventually got my library degree with Queens College, which was an amazing program, and got to do a lot of extra things.
What were some of the collections that you worked with when you were in New York?
Well, I worked with I did a fellowship with Columbia in their rare book and manuscript library, and that was really wonderful. I also worked with Tony Smith Estate, which was also kind of a really interesting introduction to how to do archival research and to really be working with older documentation. And one of the most interesting one was figuring out the final iteration of a sculpture that he made, because he made it like models of it like 3 or 4 times before he made a final decision. And so it was this whole thing where he had to go through tons of his paperwork because he was talking about it in letters to his wife, and he had like some snapshots, but we were just we were like, okay, we have these 4 versions, but we don't know the dates, and how do we figure it out? So that was exciting. I'm trying to think what other collections. A lot of it was working with galleries and sorting that out. But I guess just to go back to the Vasari Project and how it came, kind of where it was when I came in. I remember kind of moving back to Miami with my daughter and finding out that the Vasari Project was looking for an archivist. In the time of being able to go to school, I got my certificate in archives, and then kind of really realized how librarianship and archives work so well together. But from the archives perspective, you're really trying to learn how to organize and amass a lot of information and make it easy for somebody to discern who, what, where, when, and why. It's sort of like in libraries, you have a Dewey Decimal System. At least you have something that can kind of guide you into where that area is. And archives was a whole new world. We have documentation that'll kind of break down everything that's within a personal collection. And yeah, it was really amazing to be able to come into work into the Vasari Project, and then ultimately be able to begin overseeing what now is special collections and see how we can make things easier. I mean, really, at the end of the day, the whole idea of you and you and Helen and Margarita, and in some terms manifesting me and manifesting this whole project, is so amazing and impressive, especially since we're now going into year 22 of its life and its existence, and how many great things have come from it. I mean, you already know this, but the idea we just won a grant. The Vasari Project just won a really wonderful Knight Foundation art challenge grant, and that's like for us to really expand and continue working on the timeline that you that was started with you and continued with Helen as well. And so it was nice to hear you say that it was an ambitious project when you did the Miami Thriving and Change, because that's sort of what we're hoping to do as well. And
do you want to talk a little bit about the Florida collection? And
yeah, the special collections oversees a number of things. So the Vasari Project, 60mm film collection, we have rare Cuban books and poetry, and then we have the Florida collection, which is probably in our genealogy collection. So like 2 of the largest collections that we have alongside the Vasari. And the Florida collection is an assortment of books, of reference material, of clipping files, of archives, and then anything, the Romer collection, and it's like everything and anything under the sun, like no pun intended, on Florida. And so that was something really amazing to come into this position and recognize and realize how much material and history not only Florida, Miami has, and how we utilize that every day. So we also have periodicals, we have microfilm. I mean, the collection is vast. The directories,
the plat books, those are fascinating.
Right. the plat books, and like, you know, plat books that are going to give surveys of all of the different land and in the different stages that it was at. We have plat books going all the way back to the 20s. Aerial maps of Florida and the coastline from the 20s that we've had firms from all the way from New York fly down here to look at them because they're doing studies on climate change and how flooding is going to affect us, and telling us that, well, knowing 100 years before might give us a good idea and inclination about what's going to happen 100 years from now.
Right.
And definitely the Romer collection, which is, like I said, over 16,000 photographs or negatives or prints, and in a variety of different formats even. So it's like glass and safety, negative, like film and positives and prints.
And so,
Yeah.
I mean, that documentation, I mean, so much of Miami is disappearing. When you see Miami anymore, you know, you take a picture of downtown Miami, it could be St. Louis, it could be any place. It's just, but those old photographs, you can see what the draw was to Miami, the kind of tropical vegetation, and it was just kind of a wonderful green, lots of waters and things like that. And now we're so concerned about the health of the water and
Mm-hmm.
the lack of green space and trees, and it's a very different world, but it's wonderful to look back and I guess it's wonderful, sometimes disturbing to look back and see what it was.
Yeah, there's bittersweet moments, right, where you can kind of appreciate that time and see how it was, but then you have to kind of come back to reality and see where we're at this point. So the Florida collection was something that I think, similar to the Vasari Project, Florida can be a very large umbrella that covers a lot of different collections. And so another one, like a department that no longer exists, but did at a period of time, urban affairs. And urban affairs was a lot of connection with the county, as I've been told. And so we also have a lot of documentation on the building and the creation of the county. Even like we were saying, the 70s were a great time. You know, the Decade of Progress was in partly a response to the library system being created and merging with the city of Miami. So it was only a few branches, and then suddenly we tacked on an additional. How many libraries was it? I believe it was 12 that were.
I think it's in the timeline.
And then, very librarian of you, Barbara, to be referring to your notes. If needed. But the combination of that. So when urban affairs no longer existed, that ends up being part of the Florida collection.
12 new libraries.
12 new libraries. But
as well as main library, as well as the main library, and that whole complex that you're in now, the government center, not the government, the cultural complex.
Mm-hmm. To now where we have 49 branches throughout the county system. So it's pretty phenomenal in that scope, and the library is celebrating its 50th anniversary. So all of that. The Florida collection. I mean, I think that's the other interesting part. We have an exhibition right now of the 50th anniversary for the library system, and that's where we've been able to pull items from the Vasari Project, because we can really talk about all the wonderful cultural events that were happening at the time. But then we're also referring back to the library's own historical collection and materials that can really try to like tell that narrative and that story. And that's one of the things that I absolutely loved about Anita's exhibit, that she did on you and all the work that you did, because of course I'm glad that you had a good experience in putting it together, but it's also such a wonderful story that's being told through these archival materials, and let us feel like we're there a little bit more. I don't know where I'm going with that. I guess I really appreciate that and love that Anita has done this project and made you a focus, as well as women.
Right. But it's so special and so incredible that she's taken this on and has created this niche for herself and is working with Dimensions Variable. And new audiences for a lot of old information, which is very special, very wonderful.
And I think that especially during, I mean, hopefully always, but I really hope with things like what Anita's doing, what you and Helen and Margarita did in starting the Vasari Project, what I hope I will honor as I stand on the shoulders of giants, in terms of having archives be important, have people recognize that archive and the term archive is meant to talk about all these important things that we're collecting and that we don't want to forget.
We don't want to forget.
And that was something that when I talk to folks about the Vasari Project or any of it, is that, yeah, Miami isn't a cultural wasteland, but sometimes we have this what is this cultural amnesia? We kind of forget, or it might happen like in spaces that we have in Miami. Oh, you know, whether it was a nightclub or a restaurant or something, you know, these things don't really survive long periods of time, and then they sort of wash away. And so I think that when it comes to these things that happen, it's not just the cultural institutions, which of course are very important and that have loads of funding for documentation of this material and all of that, but it's also the artists that are doing happenings or independent projects or new and upcoming curators that are utilizing unexpected places to be putting together art exhibits. I think that there has been in the past contention with Art Basel, for example, right? Because we're not talking about Miami local, we're talking about international kind of.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people, I mean, Art Basel comes to Miami and there's so much international press and attention and blah, blah, blah. But then when they leave, I mean, our artists are still here and they're still making work and they're still doing incredible things. And does Art Basel really have a lot to do with the people that are living and working here? I mean, it's a kind of a big splash for a month or so, but I always wish there was a lot more. I mean, there's so many artists in Miami doing such great things, and I think the community, there's room for more attention to that and appreciation of that, I think, with the collectors in the community.
And I think that influence does exist. And I think it is happening. For all of the artists that I have met that have said that they went to the Artmobile, I know that infected them. I know that left an impression on them. And I'm secretly amassing a list that I'm going to start getting like oral histories from people telling me what you know the Artmobile did for them. But that's on a side note.
Oh, really?
I would like to. I think it's important. But then the other aspect of all of these I mean, I just know that when I was in art school, there were tons of projects that were happening with folks that now are doing amazing and incredible things. And maybe we're going to be collecting those through oral histories like this, where we're just talking and recording them so that we can remember them.
Yeah, very important.
But I do think that there are, while we might not be the main focus, I think when everybody leaves and goes back home, you know, Miami and the artists and the folks that are here that are trying to influence our community and each other and in all the most positive ways, you know, we're still here. And I definitely think that the library and the things that you did end up being a really beautiful influence on us, and the things that we are hoping to do with our Night Art Challenge grant. We want to bring more artists in. We want it to be some form of like a career day meets, you know, just meet this artist and have them talk about what they're doing and learn about our community and learn about all the people that are really trying to make this place great. So you've done very well for yourself, Barbara.
Well, I'm so pleased to have worked with Anita on this project and with you, Stephanie. I mean, really, we could not have imagined anybody more perfect for what you're doing to take care of the Vasari Project, the Florida collection, and the other collections that you're in charge of and caring for. So that's very grateful for that. Very grateful for Anita and for this opportunity.
Barbara, thank you so much for this, and I'm glad to have talked to you. And now I'm gonna invite you to Zoom with me more often now that I know that you can do it.